Introduction and meeting the double. Alexander Harrington was the epitome of success in the modern age. As the CEO of Horizon Dynamics, a tech conglomerate that revolutionized artificial intelligence and automation, his name was synonymous with innovation. Yet, behind the towering glass walls of his penthouse in Manhattan, Alexander found himself utterly alone. The luxury that surrounded him, state-of-the-art technology, rare art collections, and the finest cuisine, offered no solace. His success had come at a cost, a life devoid of meaningful relationships and purpose beyond profits and power. That evening, as Alexander's custom-made electric car glided silently through the dimly lit streets of the city, he felt a pull to drive through an unfamiliar neighborhood. He'd been restless all day, a nagging feeling of emptiness gnawing at him. His chauffeur offered to take the wheel, but Alexander declined, preferring the isolation of the driver's seat. He wanted to escape, if only for a little while, from the relentless demands of being Alexander Harrington. The neighborhood he ventured into was a stark contrast to his world of opulence. Cracked sidewalks, graffiti-stained walls, and clusters of makeshift shelters dotted the streets. Homeless individuals huddled together around barrel fires, their faces etched with stories of hardship. Alexander had never seen this side of the city up close, and the stark disparity shook him. As he slowed down to navigate a narrow street, his eyes caught something, or rather, someone, that made him slam on the brakes. Standing under a flickering streetlight was a man, his clothes tattered and his hair unkempt, but what struck Alexander was the man's face. It was like looking into a mirror. The resemblance was uncanny. Same sharp jawline, same piercing blue eyes, even the same slight crook in the nose Alexander had acquired during a skiing accident in his youth. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. The man, James, noticed the car and approached cautiously, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Hey, I'm not looking for trouble," he said, his voice rough, but carrying an undertone of dignity. "Just thought maybe you were lost or needed directions." Alexander rolled down the window, his heart pounding. No, I'm fine. He trailed off, unsure how to articulate the shock of seeing his double standing on the street. "What's your name?" "James," the man replied, studying Alexander with equal curiosity. "And you?" "Alexander," he said, stepping out of the car. The two stood face to face, the resemblance even more striking in the dim light. For a moment, neither spoke, both trying to process the surreal encounter. "You look like you've seen a ghost," James said, a faint smile breaking through his weary expression. "More like I'm looking at one," Alexander replied. "How is this possible?" "We're practically identical." James shrugged. "Life's full of mysteries, I guess." "So, what's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" Alexander hesitated before answering. "Honestly, I don't know. I just felt compelled to come here. Maybe I was looking for something." James raised an eyebrow. "Well, you found me. Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing." Intrigued and unable to walk away, Alexander invited James to have coffee at a nearby diner. Initially reluctant, James agreed, his curiosity matching Alexander's. As they sat across from each other, the fluorescent lights of the diner illuminated their striking resemblance. It wasn't just their faces, there was something about their mannerisms, the way they carried themselves, that mirrored each other. Over steaming mugs of coffee, James began to share his story. Once an aspiring musician, he'd fallen on hard times after a series of bad decisions and misfortunes. The death of his mother, financial struggles, and the betrayal of a close friend had led him down a path of despair. He'd been living on the streets for over a year, surviving day to day but holding on to a shred of hope that things might one day change. Alexander listened intently, his usual aloofness replaced with genuine interest. For the first time in years, he felt a connection with someone. Despite their vastly different circumstances, he saw fragments of himself in James, his resilience, his longing for purpose, and his quiet strength in the face of adversity. "Why do you care?" James finally asked, his tone cautious. "Guys like you don't usually bother with people like me." Alexander thought for a moment before responding. Maybe because I see a part of myself in you. And maybe because I'm tired of living a life that looks perfect on the outside but feels empty on the inside. James studied him for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. But don't think I'm some kind of charity case. I've been through enough to know when someone's just trying to ease their guilt. It's not about guilt, Alexander said firmly. It's about curiosity, and maybe a chance to change both our lives. The night stretched on as they talked, each man peeling back layers of their lives, revealing vulnerabilities they hadn't shared with anyone in years. By the time they left the diner, the seed of an idea had taken root in Alexander's mind, a bold, unconventional idea that would change everything. But for now, he simply extended his hand to James and said, "Let's meet again. I think there's more to this than coincidence." James hesitated but eventually shook Alexander's hand. "All right, Alexander. Let's see where this goes." As Alexander drove back to his penthouse, the emptiness that had plagued him earlier felt a little less suffocating. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of excitement. Little did he know, his encounter with James would lead to an extraordinary journey that would redefine their lives and the world around them, swapping lives. Alexander Harrington couldn't shake the idea that meeting James was more than a chance encounter. For days, he mulled over the implications of their uncanny resemblance and the stark contrast in their lives. The thought of James living in squalor while he lived in luxury gnawed at him. An unorthodox idea took shape in his mind, one that could provide clarity for both of them. The following week, Alexander sought out James in the same neighborhood. After some searching, he found him sitting near a makeshift shelter, strumming an old guitar with a few coins scattered in front of him. James looked up, surprised to see Alexander. "Back for more philosophical chats?" James quipped, setting the guitar aside. "Not exactly," Alexander said, sitting down beside him. "I have a proposition." James raised an eyebrow. "Proposition? Sounds serious." "It is," Alexander admitted, hesitating slightly before diving in. "What if we swapped lives for a month?" James blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Swap lives? What does that even mean?" "You take my place," Alexander explained. "Live in my penthouse, manage my company, well, at least pretend to. My staff will handle the technical details. In the meantime, I'll live as you do, on the streets, experiencing your reality." James stared at him as if he'd grown another head. "Are you serious? You want me, a homeless guy, to live like a billionaire? And you're going to, what? Sleep on sidewalks?" "Yes," Alexander replied earnestly. "It's an experiment. I want to understand the world from your perspective, and I think it could be eye-opening for you to experience mine. We both might learn something valuable." James laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "This has to be the craziest thing I've ever heard. What's the catch?" "No catch," Alexander assured him. "I'll provide everything you need to step into my world. You won't have to worry about a thing. And I'll make sure you have a way out if it gets too overwhelming." James studied Alexander's face, searching for any hint of deception. He found none. "And what do you get out of this?" "Perspective," Alexander said simply. "I've been stuck in a bubble for too long. I need to break out of it. And maybe, in the process, we'll both find something we've been missing." The idea sounded absurd to James, but the thought of escaping his struggles, even temporarily, was tempting. After a long silence, he nodded. "All right. I'll do it. But don't blame me if your world ends up being more chaotic than mine." Alexander smiled. "Deal." James steps into Alexander's world. The transition was surreal for James. Within days, he was whisked away to Alexander's sprawling penthouse, outfitted with tailored suits, and introduced to a staff that addressed him as Mr. Harrington. The luxury was overwhelming: a private elevator, a panoramic view of the city, and a wardrobe that could rival a high-end boutique. However, stepping into Alexander's world wasn't as easy as it seemed. James quickly realized that the billionaire's life was meticulously structured, with back-to-back meetings, high-stakes decisions, and a constant demand for perfection. Alexander's personal assistant, Rachel, became his lifeline, guiding him through the daily chaos. At first, James felt like an imposter. Sitting in conference rooms with executives discussing multi-million-dollar deals was daunting. But he soon discovered that his street smarts and quick thinking gave him an edge. During a critical meeting about a failing product line, James proposed an unconventional marketing strategy that resonated with the team. His idea not only salvaged the project, but also earned him the respect of the board. Despite his success, James struggled with the superficiality of Alexander's world. Lavish parties, sycophantic colleagues, and an unrelenting focus on wealth left him feeling hollow. He began to understand why Alexander described his life as empty. Alexander faces the streets. Meanwhile, Alexander traded his tailored suits for second-hand clothes and a backpack. His first night on the streets was a rude awakening. The cold seeped into his bones, and the concrete sidewalk was unforgiving. He quickly realized that his wealth and influence meant nothing in this world. He was just another nameless face, trying to survive. Finding food was a challenge. Alexander scavenged through dumpsters and relied on the kindness of strangers for spare change. The indignity of being ignored or judged by passers-by was humbling. He learned to navigate the unspoken rules of street life, guided by the few homeless individuals who were willing to help. One of his greatest challenges was the loss of control. In his world, Alexander had always been the master of his destiny. On the streets, he was at the mercy of circumstances beyond his control. Yet, amidst the hardships, he found moments of humanity. He shared stories around barrel fires, formed friendships with those who had nothing to give but their time, and began to see the resilience and strength in people society often overlooked. Unexpected challenges. Both men faced unexpected challenges in their new roles. For James, the pressure of maintaining Alexander's public image was exhausting. He grappled with the loneliness of being surrounded by people who cared more about his wealth than his well-being. Even the simplest interactions felt transactional. For Alexander, the physical and emotional toll of street life was staggering. Hunger, exhaustion, and constant vulnerability tested his limits. Yet, he also felt a strange sense of freedom. Without the trappings of his old life, he began to reconnect with a part of himself he'd long forgotten. As the month progressed, both men gained a deeper understanding of their respective worlds. James learned that wealth and power didn't guarantee happiness, while Alexander discovered the resilience and humanity that thrived even in the harshest conditions. Neither man could have predicted how profoundly the experience would change them, or the ripple effects it would have on those around them. Transformations. James's impact on Alexander's world. James found himself navigating a world of privilege, power, and constant scrutiny. Though he felt like a fish out of water in Alexander's sleek, high-tech penthouse, he began to adapt. At first, he leaned heavily on Rachel, Alexander's loyal assistant, who managed the day-to-day intricacies of the billionaire's life. With her guidance, James attended board meetings, mingled at high-profile events, and participated in key decision-making moments. It wasn't long before his authenticity began to shine through. James's straightforward, no-nonsense approach to problem-solving contrasted sharply with the polished but often detached attitudes of the corporate elite. During a particularly tense meeting about downsizing, James surprised the room by rejecting the proposed layoffs and suggesting an alternative. "Why are we cutting jobs when we're sitting on millions in bonuses for the execs?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. "Invest in your people, and they'll invest in you. You want loyalty? Show some." The room went silent. Executives exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Rachel noticed how a few employees nodded subtly. James's suggestion was unorthodox, but it struck a chord. The decision to retain jobs and restructure bonuses turned out to be a PR win, earning the company praise in the media and boosting employee morale. Outside the boardroom, James connected with Alexander's employees on a personal level. He took time to speak with janitors, receptionists, and junior staff, learning their names and stories. Word spread quickly about the new Alexander Harrington, who seemed more approachable and human. Employees who had once feared their aloof CEO now found themselves inspired by his apparent transformation. What James didn't realize was that his simple acts of kindness, bringing coffee to a late-night security guard or helping a junior employee brainstorm ideas, were changing the company's culture. Slowly but surely, Horizon Dynamics was becoming a place where people felt valued, not just as cogs in a corporate machine, but as individuals. Alexander's harsh reality. Meanwhile, Alexander was experiencing a transformation of his own, though his journey was far more grueling. The first week on the streets had been a brutal awakening. Hunger gnawed at him constantly, and the nights were impossibly cold. He struggled to find safe places to sleep, often waking up stiff and aching. The constant noise of the city and the ever-present threat of danger wore him down. The greatest challenge, however, was the way people treated him. Alexander, who was accustomed to commanding respect with his presence alone, found himself invisible. People avoided his gaze, crossed the street to avoid him, or dismissed him with curt gestures. The humiliation was profound, but it opened his eyes to the everyday indignities faced by the homeless. Despite the hardships, Alexander found moments of connection that surprised him. He befriended an older man named Walter, a Vietnam veteran with a sharp wit and a wealth of street knowledge. Walter taught him how to navigate shelters, avoid dangerous areas, and stretch a few dollars for food. "You're not bad for a newbie," Walter said one evening as they shared a meal from a soup kitchen. "But you've got a long way to go before you understand this life." Alexander also bonded with a young woman named Carla, who had ended up on the streets after fleeing an abusive relationship. Her resilience and determination to rebuild her life deeply moved him. She had dreams of becoming a nurse and was saving every penny she could to enroll in a community college program. Their stories stayed with Alexander, reminding him of the human spirit's capacity for perseverance. Slowly, his initial despair turned into empathy and a desire to help. He began using what little he had to support others, sharing meals, offering his spot in line at shelters, and simply listening to those who needed to talk. Growth and self-reflection. As the days turned into weeks, both men began to reflect on their lives and the worlds they had swapped. James marveled at the power and influence Alexander wielded, but also recognized the isolating nature of his wealth. Despite the comfort and security of Alexander's life, James found himself longing for genuine human connection. The lavish parties and high society events felt hollow, filled with people more interested in Alexander's bank account than his character. "Money can buy a lot," James mused one evening as he looked out over the glittering city skyline. "But it can't buy what really matters." Alexander, on the other hand, was humbled by the resilience and generosity he witnessed among the homeless community. He realized how disconnected he had been from the struggles of ordinary people. For years, he had built his empire with a single-minded focus on profits, blind to the systemic issues that trapped so many in poverty. "I've been so out of touch," he admitted to Walter one night. "I had no idea how hard life could be for people like you." Eventually, James uncovered the mastermind behind the scheme, Alan Whitaker, Horizon's CFO. Alan had been pushing the outsourcing initiative for months, framing it as a necessary step to maintain the company's profitability. However, James discovered emails revealing that Alan stood to personally profit from the move through kickbacks from the overseas contractors. James knew he had to act, but he also realized that exposing the plot would shake the company to its core. With Rachel's help, he prepared a detailed report and called an emergency meeting of the board. Standing before a room of seasoned executives, James laid out the evidence with a calm but firm resolve. "This company was built on innovation and the hard work of its employees," he said, his voice steady. "Sacrificing them for short-term gains isn't just unethical, it's bad business. We're better than this." The room erupted in a mix of shock and anger, but James's determination won the day. Alan was promptly removed from his position, and the outsourcing plan was scrapped. The employees James had fought for never knew the full extent of what had been at stake, but the decision saved their jobs, and their trust in the company. Alexander's mission on the streets. Meanwhile, Alexander's time on the streets had transformed his perspective on wealth and privilege. Initially overwhelmed by the harsh realities of homelessness, he had gradually found purpose in helping those around him. He listened to their stories, shared their struggles, and began to see the systemic barriers that kept so many trapped in poverty. One of the communities Alexander grew close to was a small group of homeless individuals living under a bridge. Among them was Carla, the aspiring nurse, and Walter, the Vietnam veteran who had taken Alexander under his wing. The group's resilience inspired him, but their challenges were daunting. Limited access to healthcare, constant threats from law enforcement, and a lack of resources left them vulnerable. Alexander decided to use his influence to make a difference. Through discreet calls to contacts who didn't recognize his new identity, he secured funding for a local shelter that provided meals, medical care, and job training programs. He also partnered with a nonprofit to establish a mobile clinic that served the homeless community. One of his proudest moments came when he helped Carla enroll in a nursing program. Using his connections, he secured a scholarship for her and ensured she had the supplies she needed to succeed. The joy in her eyes reminded Alexander of the power of small acts of kindness. Word of Alexander's efforts spread through the homeless community. Though he didn't reveal his true identity, people began to see him as a leader and advocate. For the first time in years, Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment that his billions had never brought him. The impact of the swap. As the end of the month approached, both men reflected on how much they had changed. James, once cynical about wealth and power, had discovered the responsibility that came with it. He realized that Alexander's world wasn't as easy or glamorous as it seemed and that ethical leadership required courage and conviction. Alexander, on the other hand, had gained a profound understanding of resilience and humanity. He saw the cracks in the system he had once overlooked and felt a renewed sense of purpose to use his resources to address them. When the two men finally reunited, the exchange was emotional. James recounted his experience exposing the outsourcing plot, while Alexander shared stories of the people he had met and helped. Both men were struck by how deeply they had impacted each other's worlds. "You've done more with my company in a month than I've done in years," Alexander said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've shown me what real leadership looks like." "And you've shown me that wealth isn't just about money," James replied. "It's about what you do with it." Ripple effects. The consequences of their swap rippled far beyond their own lives. Under James's temporary leadership, Horizon Dynamics had become a more compassionate and innovative company, inspiring employees and boosting morale. Alexander, now back in his role as CEO, committed to continuing the changes James had started. In the homeless community, Alexander's efforts had brought hope and tangible improvements. Carla's enrollment in nursing school became a symbol of possibility, and Walter found a part-time job through one of the programs Alexander had supported. Both men knew their experiment had been unconventional, even risky. But it had proven one undeniable truth: stepping into another person's shoes could change not only your perspective but the world around you. They had walked away from the experience as better versions of themselves, ready to use their newfound insights to create lasting change. Resolution and new beginnings. The switch back. When the agreed month came to an end, Alexander and James met in a small cafe, far from the high-rises and bustling streets of the corporate world. Both men carried an air of transformation, their experiences etched into their faces and evident in their posture. They exchanged a firm handshake that quickly turned into a heartfelt embrace. "You look different," Alexander said, noticing James's confident demeanor. "Same to you," James replied, grinning. "How's life on the streets treating you?" Alexander laughed, though the memory of cold nights and empty stomachs lingered. "Tougher than I ever imagined. But I learned more than I thought possible." "And the boardroom?" James asked, raising an eyebrow. "Safe to say I'm glad you were there," Alexander admitted. "You saved a lot of jobs, and probably my company's reputation." They spent the next hour sharing stories, each marveling at how the other had navigated their world. By the end of the conversation, one thing was clear: neither man would ever see life the same way again. Alexander's new vision. Returning to his role as CEO, Alexander wasted no time implementing the lessons he'd learned. His first move was to formalize many of the cultural changes James had initiated. He introduced new policies to ensure job security, fair wages, and support for employees facing personal hardships. The company's profits would no longer come at the expense of its people. But Alexander didn't stop there. He used his wealth and influence to address the systemic issues he had witnessed firsthand. He launched a new division within Horizon Dynamics focused on social impact, investing in affordable housing projects, mental health initiatives, and educational programs for underserved communities. One of his most ambitious projects was a partnership with local governments to develop resource centers for the homeless. These centers provided shelter, healthcare, job training, and mental health services. Alexander ensured the centers were well-funded and staffed by people who genuinely cared about making a difference. At the next board meeting, Alexander delivered a speech that left the room silent. "This company has always been about innovation," he said. "But the greatest innovation we can bring to the world is hope. And hope begins with taking care of the people who make this company, and this world, possible." James's new mission. Inspired by his time in Alexander's shoes, James decided to dedicate his life to helping those who, like him, had been overlooked by society. With Alexander's support, he founded the New Horizons Foundation, a non-profit organization aimed at breaking the cycle of homelessness. Inspired by his time in Alexander's shoes, James decided to dedicate his life to helping those who, like him, had been overlooked by society. With Alexander's support, he founded the New Horizons Foundation, a non-profit organization aimed at breaking the cycle of homelessness. The foundation offered a holistic approach, providing immediate relief in the form of food and shelter, while also addressing the root causes of homelessness through education, job training, and mental health support. James's first-hand experience allowed him to design programs that truly met the needs of those they served. James was a natural leader, his authenticity resonating with donors, volunteers, and those seeking help. He made it a point to visit every shelter and resource center, speaking directly with the people his foundation served. His story of resilience and transformation inspired countless others to believe that change was possible. With funding from Alexander and support from other philanthropists, the New Horizons Foundation quickly grew into a national movement. James became a prominent advocate for systemic change, speaking at conferences, meeting with policymakers, and pushing for legislation to address housing insecurity. A united purpose. Months later, Alexander and James stood side by side at a grand charity gala held in the heart of Manhattan. The event was a joint effort between Horizon Dynamics and the New Horizons Foundation, raising funds for their shared mission of empowering marginalized communities. The room was filled with a mix of corporate leaders, activists, and everyday people whose lives had been touched by the two men's efforts. Carla, now a nursing student, gave a heartfelt speech about how both Alexander and James had changed her life. Walter, the Vietnam veteran, was there too, proudly wearing a new suit and helping coordinate the event as a volunteer. As the evening progressed, Alexander and James found themselves on stage together, addressing the audience. "I used to think success was measured by wealth and power," Alexander began. "But real success is about the impact we have on the lives of others. This journey has taught me that even the smallest act of kindness can create ripples of change." James took the microphone, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "I used to think people like Alexander were untouchable, living in a world I'd never understand. But what I've learned is that no matter where we come from, we all have the power to make a difference. All it takes is a little faith and a lot of heart." The crowd erupted in applause as the two men embraced, united by a shared journey and a common purpose. A new beginning. As the gala drew to a close, Alexander and James stepped outside to take in the city skyline. The towering buildings that once symbolized division now felt like a testament to what they had achieved together. "What now?" James asked, a hint of humor in his tone.